Dad, you forgot the napkins again. Dylan's tiny voice rang from the backseat as Carter Daniels balanced two paper-bagged dinners in one hand and a GPS in the other. I'll grab 'em next time, bud, Carter muttered, slamming the car door shut with his hip, his delivery shirt wrinkled from a long day of non-stop runs. He glanced up at the towering glass building in front of him, squinting at the sheer height of it. Penthouse. He checked the receipt again. Yep, someone had ordered 2 truffle steaks, lobster risotto, and a bottle of wine that cost more than his monthly rent. From a place he could never afford to eat at himself. Carter ran a hand through his dark, tousled hair and headed into the marble lobby, nodding politely at the concierge. Delivery for Penthouse 34, he said. The concierge barely looked at him as he buzzed him up. The elevator opened with a soft chime, revealing a hallway that looked more like a 5-star hotel than an apartment. Carter walked down it, trying not to notice how his sneakers squeaked on the polished floors. He rang the doorbell, adjusted the bag in his grip, and took a breath. The door opened and she was, barefoot and stunning. Morgan Delaney, he asked, stunned for a second not because of her name, but because of her. She was in an oversized cashmere sweater, her long hair tied up in a messy bun, no makeup, and still somehow the most elegant thing he'd ever seen. He half expected a butler to appear behind her, but there was no one else in sight. "That's me," she said, her voice smooth, warm. "You're earlier than they said." "Traffic was light," Carter replied, handing over the bag. "Here's your order. Do you want me to wait while you check it?" She shook her head and smiled. "Trust you." He blinked. Most people in places like this didn't even make eye contact with him. Trust wasn't usually part of the exchange. Morgan glanced at his shirt. "Carter, huh?" He looked down at the stitched name tag. "Yeah, that's me." "I'm Morgan," she said again, then paused. "Do you want some water or anything before you go?" He stared for a second. "No, I'm good, but thanks." She gave him another soft smile. "Okay, well, have a good night, Carter." He turned to leave, heart weirdly racing. As the elevator doors closed, he shook his head. She was just being polite. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Morgan watched the elevator lights descend, biting her lip. He was different. Not because he was handsome, though he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with warm brown eyes and a rough kind of charm. But because when he looked at her, it wasn't through the lens of who she was. He didn't know who she was. And for the first time in a long time, that felt nice. She walked back into her penthouse, the city glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and sat at the glass dining table she rarely used. She ate alone. Again. Morgan Delaney, founder of one of the fastest-growing fashion platforms in the country, worth millions, with a view worth more than most houses, and she'd never felt more bored. Until Carter. 2 days later, Carter was back at the restaurant, stuffing napkins into a bag when his manager called out, "Daniels, you're up. Penthouse 34 again." He froze. Dylan tugged at his sleeve. "That's the lady with the big windows, right?" Carter chuckled. "Yeah, buddy, that's the one." He made the delivery himself. When Morgan opened the door, she looked like she'd been waiting. She wasn't barefoot this time. She had on jeans and a white shirt, her hair down in soft waves. "You again," she said, smiling. He scratched the back of his neck. "Guess you're my lucky route." "You wanna come in for a minute?" She stepped aside. "I won't bite." Carter hesitated. "I've got my kid in the car." She blinked. "Your kid?" "Yeah, Dylan, he's 8. He's homesick today, couldn't send him to school, and couldn't get a sitter." Morgan's expression softened. "Bring him up next time." He laughed. "Yeah, right. I mean it." That night, Carter didn't sleep much. He wasn't used to women like her. Women who owned penthouses and wore designer clothes like it was nothing, but she didn't act like it. She was easy to talk to, funny, real. And she wanted him to bring his son. 3 days later, Dylan followed Carter into the penthouse, eyes wide. "Whoa," Dylan whispered. "This is like a superhero lair." Morgan laughed as she knelt to his level. "Hey, Dylan, I'm Morgan." "You live here?" he asked, looking around like he expected Iron Man to walk out. "I do." He turned to Carter. "Can we stay here forever?" Carter rolled his eyes. "Don't be rude, dude." Morgan grinned. "He's not rude, he's honest." She invited them to stay for lunch. Carter tried to refuse, but Morgan insisted. And before he knew it, his son was eating pasta at a marble kitchen island while Morgan poured him a glass of sparkling water. "Is this like soda with no fun in it?" Dylan asked, making Morgan laugh so hard she nearly choked. Carter couldn't stop watching her. How easily she laughed, how good she was with Dylan, how normal she made this all feel. Over the next week, Morgan kept ordering dinners, always when she knew Carter would be working. Sometimes she requested something specific, just so she could add a note. "Hope Dylan's feeling better," or "Tell me your favorite movie next time." Carter started looking forward to her orders. One night after another delivery, she invited him in again. They stood on her balcony, the city glowing below them. "So what's your story, Carter Daniels?" she asked gently. He leaned on the railing. "Single dad. Dylan's mom left when he was 3. Worked 2 jobs, trying to keep things afloat." She nodded. "You always this honest." He smirked. "You always this nosy." She laughed, then looked at him, serious again. "You're a good dad." Carter glanced at her. "That why you keep ordering lobster risotto?" Morgan stepped closer. "Maybe I just like having you around." His breath caught. He hadn't been looked at like that in years. He hadn't felt like this, ever. But she was Morgan Delaney, the woman with a penthouse, and he was just the guy delivering her food. Still, when she looked at him like that, he felt like he belonged. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to. "You don't like being here, do you?" Carter paused mid-bite, eyes flicking up from the plate of roasted duck Morgan had somehow convinced him to try. He swallowed, setting his fork down. "Here, like, your place." Morgan leaned back in her chair, one bare foot tucked beneath her. "No, here, like in a space where you're not in control, you don't relax." He let out a quiet breath, studying the candlelight flickering between them. The dining room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside her windows. "I'm not used to letting my guard down, that's all." "Because of Dylan?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded once. "There's no safety net. If I mess up, he's the one who pays the price. So yeah, keep things tight." Her fingers brushed the stem of her wine glass. "That's a lot to carry." "I've gotten used to it," he said. "You'd be surprised how far you can go when you don't have a choice." Morgan tilted her head, considering him. "What would you do if you did have a choice?" Carter looked at her, caught off guard. "I don't know, I've never thought about it." She leaned forward slightly. "You should." He gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, just tired. "That's easy for someone like you to say." Morgan didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I didn't always have this." His brow lifted. "No." She hesitated, then stood, walking over to a lacquered cabinet and pulling out a faded photo. She handed it to him. A teenage girl stood in front of a trailer, hair in a ponytail, grease-streaked jeans, and a stubborn set to her jaw. Carter glanced up at Morgan. "That was me," she said. 17, working at a body shop in Tucson. My dad disappeared when I was 14. My mom floated in and out of rehab. Ran the household until I got out." He studied the photo again. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," she said softly. He handed the photo back, and Morgan placed it carefully on a shelf before returning to the table. "Why fashion?" he asked after a moment. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something more thoughtful. It was never about clothes. It was about control, creating something beautiful out of a mess. That's what I craved. She glanced at him. "What about you? What did you want before life got in the way?" Carter looked down at his hands. "I liked building things. I used to sketch houses when I was a kid, thought I'd become an architect." She leaned her chin into her palm. "Why didn't you?" He gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Life rerouted me fast. Dylan was born and I had to stop school. Haven't looked back since." Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you ever want to go back?" He looked at her, something unspoken hanging in the air. If it meant leaving him behind to do it, no. "I didn't say leave him behind." Her voice was steady. "I said go back." Carter didn't answer. The idea was too foreign, too dangerous to entertain. Morgan rose from the table and disappeared into another room. When she returned, she handed him a thick envelope. He opened it and blinked. Blueprints. His own, but printed professionally. She'd found the sketches he'd brought once to show Dylan during a delivery, folded in the backseat of the car. He'd forgotten about them. "I scanned them after Dylan showed me," she said. "They're good, Carter, like really good. You're wasting yourself delivering takeout." He stared at the pages, throat tight. "These were just for fun." "They don't look like it." He looked at her, unsure what to say. Morgan stepped closer. "Let me help." He shook his head instantly. "No, I don't need." "I didn't say I'd fix your life," she interrupted. "I said I'd help. There's a difference." Carter stood, folding the papers. "Can't accept charity." "This isn't charity," she said, voice sharper now. "This is someone who believes in you saying, maybe you don't have to do everything alone." He hesitated, then slid the envelope under his arm. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." Morgan watched him walk toward the door, her expression unreadable. Just as he reached for the handle, she said, "I don't pity you, Carter. I admire you, that's the difference." He paused, his jaw tight. "That makes this even more confusing." "Why?" "Because you're you, and I'm not even on the same planet." Morgan's voice was calm. "Then maybe it's time you stop thinking in planets." He didn't answer, he left. The next morning, Carter dropped Dylan off with his neighbor, Mrs. Rios, who had agreed to keep an eye on him while she watched her grandkids. He drove to the pier, parked, and walked until he reached the edge of a construction site he used to pass on his way to school. There was an office trailer there now. He stood in front of it for a while before going in. Inside, he spoke to a foreman, asked about apprenticeships, asked about starting over. He left with a card and a list of requirements. That night, he didn't bring Morgan her order. Someone else did. But the day after that, he knocked on her door. She opened it, surprised. No food. "No," he said, holding up a folder. "Just a guy trying to figure out what it means to not do things alone." Morgan stepped aside to let him in, her eyes bright. "Good," she said, "because I've been waiting for you to say that." "Do you always look like that when you make a decision?" Morgan asked, arching an eyebrow as she stepped beside Carter on the balcony. The wind tugged gently at her silk blouse, the evening city humming below them. He glanced at her, then back out at the skyline, his jaw tight. "Like what?" "Like someone just dared you to jump." He gave a small exhale, not quite a laugh. "That's not far off." Inside, the low sound of jazz floated from her speakers. The apartment was warm with the scent of rosemary and garlic she'd cooked. He hadn't expected that. He turned to her. "Talked to the program director this morning. They're willing to let me start part-time while finish the requirements. Said they've never seen sketches that detailed from someone without formal training. Morgan leaned against the railing, her profile catching the distant glow of streetlights. Of course they did. I didn't tell them how long ago I drew those, he added, or that I haven't picked up a pencil since. She looked over at him. Still doesn't change what they saw. He hesitated, then said, I haven't told Dylan yet. Why not? Because I don't want to promise him something I'm not sure can finish. Morgan didn't argue. She just nodded, like she understood exactly what he meant. After a long silence, she said, I used to draw too. That surprised him. What? Before everything took off, she said, her voice softer now. Sketchbooks full of designs, not for brands, just for fun. I stopped the moment it became business. He studied her for a beat. Do you miss it? She looked down at her hands. Sometimes, but I think I miss who I was when I was doing it more. That struck something in him, something he hadn't had words for until now. He nodded once, slow. A knock sounded at the door. Morgan blinked, then pushed away from the railing. I wasn't expecting anyone. Carter followed her into the living room. She opened the door and froze. A tall man in a navy blazer stood there, holding a bouquet of white lilies. His hair was perfectly in place, and his presence filled the doorway like he was used to owning whatever room he walked into. Michael, Morgan said, her voice flat. Carter stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware of how casual he looked. Faded jeans, a plain tee, hands still stained faintly from graphite. Michael's eyes flicked to Carter, then back to Morgan. Did I come at a bad time? That depends on why you're here. I heard about the expansion deal. Thought I'd stop by, say congratulations, in person. Morgan stepped fully into the doorway, blocking his view of the apartment. You haven't shown up in over a year. What do you want? Michael's jaw tensed, but his tone stayed smooth. Maybe I realized I made a mistake. Carter turned away, heading toward the kitchen, unsure if he should even still be here. He felt like an intruder. Don't do this, Morgan said behind him. Don't show up with flowers like that erases what happened. Michael didn't respond immediately. Then, you were different with me, Morgan. Her voice sharpened. I was younger and stupid. Carter reached for his keys on the counter. Carter, wait, she called. He turned, hand frozen mid-reach. As she stepped back inside and shut the door firmly behind her, the flowers still in Michael's hand. I'm sorry, she said, walking toward him. I didn't know he was coming. He gave a nod. You don't owe me an explanation. I do, actually. He waited. He was my ex, she said. We were together when I started the company. He was there for the early wins, but when things got hard, he bailed. Said I was too focused on work. That I'd changed. Carter's voice was quiet. Did you? Morgan met his gaze. Maybe I did, but not the way he thought. Just stopped needing him. He exhaled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. I didn't invite him back into my life, she added, and I'm not planning to. Carter looked at her for a long moment. You ever think the universe just likes messing with us? She smiled faintly. Every day. He set the keys back down on the counter. I should go. Dylan's got a school project due, and he's already pushing bedtime. Morgan walked him to the door. Will you come back? Carter paused. Do you want me to? Yes, she said without hesitation, but only if it's what you want. He nodded once, then left. The next evening, he didn't come. Neither did the one after that. On the third day, Morgan sat in her living room with her laptop open and a half-written email on the screen. She deleted it. The elevator dinged. She didn't move. Then came the knock. She opened the door and found Carter standing there, holding a rolled-up blueprint tube and a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I didn't mean to disappear," he said. "I figured you were thinking," she replied. "I was." She stepped aside. He came in. "I brought something," he said, handing her the box. Inside was a drafting pencil set, used but well kept, hers. "You left this in my car the day you showed Dylan your sketches," he said. "I didn't know if you wanted it back." Morgan traced a finger along the edge of the box. "I forgot even had it." He unrolled the blueprint on her coffee table. It was one of his own designs, a single-story home with wide windows and a wrap-around porch. "I finished this last night," he said. "It's for us." She looked up. "Not like that," he added quickly, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, it's a project, for the portfolio, but I thought, if you ever want to design again, too, maybe we could build something together, just for fun." Morgan stared at the blueprint, heart thudding. "Unless that's too weird," he added. "I just thought." "It's not weird," she interrupted. "It's perfect." And it was. Not because it was a blueprint, but because it was the first thing anyone had given her in years that didn't come with strings. Carter adjusted the tie around his neck for the third time, his reflection in the mirror looking just as unsure as he felt. The charcoal suit clung a little too tightly across his shoulders, borrowed from his neighbor's son who had worn it to a wedding last spring. But it was clean, pressed, and according to Dylan, made him look like a guy in a movie who knows what he's doing. He wasn't so sure. Behind him, Dylan popped his head in through the bedroom door. "You ready?" Carter turned. "You're not coming, remember?" "I know," Dylan said, stepping into the room with a solemn kind of pride. "But I wanted to see." Carter knelt. "You've got your project ready for Monday." Dylan nodded. "The one about bridges. Miss Keller said it was cool that I drew the beams underneath, not just the top part." Carter tugged gently at the collar. "That's because you paid attention to how things are built, not just what looks good." "You do that too." Carter smiled quietly, then stood. "I'll be back before you're asleep. Mrs. Rios is just across the hall if you need anything, okay?" "I know, Dad." Dylan hesitated, then added, "Morgan's gonna be there, right?" "Yeah," Carter said. "She's the one who invited me." Dylan gave a wide grin. "Good, she makes you less tense." Carter laughed under his breath. "You're too observant." Dylan shrugged. "You're easy to read." Half an hour later, Carter stood in front of a grand limestone building in Tribeca, the dark car that had picked him up gliding away down the street. Spotlights lit the steps, and the red carpet stretched through the entrance like the whole city had been invited inside. He hadn't realized this was a gala. He hadn't even known what a founder's circle meant until Morgan mentioned it 2 days ago. He stepped inside and was immediately surrounded by soft jazz, glittering chandeliers, and people who looked like they'd stepped out of magazines. Champagne glasses floated past on silver trays. Laughter drifted from every corner. He forced himself not to tug at his sleeves. Then he saw her. Morgan was standing near the far end of the room, in a midnight blue gown that moved like water when she turned. Her hair was up in a loose twist, and her earrings caught the light with every small tilt of her head. She was talking to an older couple, smiling politely, but the second she saw Carter, her whole face changed. She excused herself and crossed the room toward him, heels silent on the marble floor. "You came," she said, voice low. "You invited me," Carter replied. "I wasn't sure you would." He glanced around. "I don't exactly blend in here." "You're not supposed to," she said. "That's kind of the point." Before he could respond, a man in a tuxedo approached, offering Morgan a glass of wine and greeting her with a familiarity Carter didn't like. She accepted the drink with a nod before turning back to Carter without missing a beat. "Come with me," she said, and led him through a side hallway, past a velvet curtain, and out onto a rooftop terrace. The air was cooler up here, the city stretching out around them in every direction. String lights hung from poles, and a jazz trio played quietly in the corner, but they were alone. She leaned against the railing. "I know this isn't your world. I didn't bring you here to showcase anything. I just wanted you to see it." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because this is only half of who I am, and don't want you thinking I'm just one version of myself." He stepped closer until they were shoulder to shoulder. "You're not, I know that." She glanced at him, surprised. "I've seen more of you in the past few weeks than I ever saw in anyone I used to date," he said. "You didn't have to bring me here to prove anything. You already did." Morgan looked away, her voice quiet. "I was scared you'd come and hate it." "I don't hate it," he replied. "I hate that I almost didn't come." "Why did you?" she asked. He turned toward her fully. "Because you asked me, and because I trust you." Her eyes searched his, even now. "Especially now." She reached for his hand, fingers brushing against his tentatively. He took it without hesitation. "I want this to work, Carter," she said, "even if it doesn't make sense on paper." "It doesn't have to make sense," he said. "It just has to feel right." She moved closer. "It does." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Then, let's stop waiting for the right moment." She kissed him first. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It was everything that had built between them, every shared glance, every quiet moment, every unspoken promise. It was a beginning. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Morgan stood beside Carter while he spoke to one of the architects from the university program. She watched him explain his portfolio, his hands animated, his voice steady. The man handed him a card, impressed. When they left together, the car door opened for her first, but she waited. Carter gestured for her to go ahead. She shook her head. "We get in together." They drove in silence, her hand resting on his knee, his fingers tracing lazy circles against her skin. At his building, he turned to her. "You want to come up?" She shook her head. "Not tonight." He nodded, not disappointed, just understanding. "But I do want to see what you're building," she added, "not just on paper." He opened the door, then paused. "Neither of us planned for this." "No," she said, "but I'm glad it happened." As he stepped out, she called after him, "Carter." He turned. "I bought the empty lot on Emerson Street." He stared. "That's the one across from the park." She nodded. "You said once it was your favorite corner. I thought maybe it could be something more." He walked back to the car and leaned in. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, "that if you're ready to build, I'm ready to back you." He didn't answer right away. Then he smiled wide, real, and with a kind of joy that made it impossible not to feel it too. "I guess we're really doing this." She replied, "We already are." 3 months later, Carter stood in front of the lot on Emerson Street, blueprints in hand, as Morgan stepped beside him in jeans and a white tee. Dylan ran ahead of them, waving to the construction crew. The foundation was being poured. And so was theirs. Not fast, not perfect, but solid. Built to last. The sound of chalk scraping against wood echoed through the nearly finished model home as Carter crouched beside Dylan, guiding his son's hand as they marked a measurement on the temporary porch frame. "Steady pressure," Carter said, adjusting Dylan's grip. "You want the line to be clean, not hacked." "This is harder than it looks," Dylan murmured, tongue between his teeth. "That's why I make it look easy," Carter replied, giving his son a gentle elbow. Dylan grinned, brushing sawdust from his pants. Do you think Mom would have liked this? Carter looked at him, surprised by the question. I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming, he said carefully. And I think she'd be stunned we're building something that doesn't fall over. Dylan laughed, then stood, brushing his palms together. Morgan's here. Carter turned as Morgan stepped into the house, wearing flats and an oversized blue button-up, her sunglasses tucked into the neckline. She carried a brown paper bag in one hand and a rolled-up folder in the other. I come bearing bribes, she said, lifting the bag. Chocolate croissants and real coffee. Carter wiped his hands on a rag and walked over, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek before taking the bag. Where's the meeting? He asked, nodding toward the folder. City planner's office, she said, opening the roll to reveal updated zoning permits. They approved the community rec space. You can start sketching the garden layout. Dylan brightened. Can we put a fountain in it? Morgan handed him the folder. That's your job now. You're in charge of the courtyard design. Carter raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of pressure for a 10-year-old. I believe in nepotism, she said, her eyes dancing. They sat on the porch frame, passing around pastries and coffee, the late morning sun warming the wood beneath them. The house was still a skeleton, but the bones were strong. Carter's design, Morgan's funding, Dylan's ideas sketched in pencil and layered in hope. Later, Carter and Morgan walked through the rooms alone. The drywall had begun, and the light filtering through the plastic-covered windows cast soft shadows across the new walls. You're quiet, Morgan said, as they reached what would be the living room. Carter ran his fingers along the frame of the window cutout. I've never had something that was mine like this. Something I made, not just got through. Morgan leaned against the opposite wall. It's not just yours. He looked at her. It's ours, she said. You didn't do this alone. I know, he replied. That's the part that still amazes me. Morgan stepped forward, her voice gentler now. You've always been capable of this, Carter. You just didn't have space to dream. You gave me that, he said. She shook her head. I just reminded you it was okay to want more. He reached for her hand. You didn't just remind me, you stood with me while I figured it out. She squeezed his hand, and I'm not going anywhere. That night, they hosted a small dinner in Morgan's apartment for a few of the construction team and city officials. Carter stood in the kitchen, helping Morgan plate lemon roasted chicken, while Dylan babbled about community composting to an older architect who actually seemed impressed. As the evening wound down and the last guest left, Carter turned to Morgan, who was barefoot now, hair loosened and cheeks flushed from wine and warmth. I was thinking, he said, drying a plate, about what you said, about wanting more. She looked over her shoulder. Yes. I want more with you. Morgan dried her hands and leaned against the sink. What kind of more? He stepped closer. All of it. The chaos, the quiet mornings, the arguments over wall colors, every single one of Dylan's school projects. I want that with you. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Are you asking me something, or are you warning me? I'm asking, he said. Not with a ring yet, not tonight, but I'm asking if that's what you want too. She took his face in both hands. Yes, it's what I've wanted for a long time. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask questions. The kind that answered them. 3 months later, the house was finished. They held a neighborhood open house, with paper lanterns strung from the porch beams and tables filled with iced lemonade and homemade cookies. Dylan acted as tour guide, proudly pointing out the energy-efficient windows and the garden design he drafted. Morgan wore a sundress and simple sandals, her hand never far from Carter's. They moved through the crowd like they had always moved together, easy, unhurried, sure. When the guests thinned, Carter took Morgan's hand and pulled her into the living room. I've been waiting for the right moment, he said. She tilted her head. For what? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As she stilled, "It's not about the ring," he said. "It's about the life, and I want mine with you." He opened the box. The ring was simple, a single emerald set in gold. "I figured you'd appreciate something that didn't scream for attention," he said. Morgan stared at him, then at the ring, then back at him again. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice thick. "I've never been more sure." She didn't cry. She just smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when something long hoped for finally lands in your hands. "Yes," she said. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, sunlight streaming through the new windows. The house wasn't just a project or a milestone. It was a beginning. And they were building it together. 1 year later, Morgan walked through the now finished home, barefoot, her fingers trailing over the polished kitchen island as she passed. Outside, voices floated in Dylan and Carter arguing about who cheated in the last board game. She stepped onto the porch, where Carter was setting up lemonade, sleeves rolled up, a pencil stuck behind his ear. Dylan lounged on the porch swing, sketchpad in his lap. "Anyone want to come inside?" she called. Carter looked up. "Only if you're making those blueberry scones again." Dylan added, "And the cinnamon ones." She crossed her arms. "You two are spoiled." Carter came to her, wrapped an arm around her waist. "And madly in love with the woman who spoils us." She leaned into him. "Well, I guess I better keep it up." He kissed her temple. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to us." She looked out at the garden, where the first sprouts were pushing through the soil. "Same," she whispered. They stayed like that, wrapped in soft light, surrounded by what they'd built, not just a home, but a life. Together, always.